Okay, picking up where we left off, we're on page 7, talking about the triple constraint. This is the one that I always like. Do you want it fast, good, or cheap? Pick any two. You really can't have all three. Well, their version is a little bit more sophisticated. They talk about scope, the cost, and time. It's the same thing. They're just using a less humorous version. Anyway, so the idea is that you know what these things are. The scope would be what it does. Does it meet all the requirements? Does it cost what it's supposed to cost? Did you get it in on the right amount of time? They also throw in a fourth one, if you turn the page, talk about adding quality as a fourth constraint. To me, the quality and scope would be kind of scrunched together, so I don't think, I like the three. I like the three triangle thing. And then after they finish talking about these, successful things, then they go off and then just completely violate the rule they just created and says, it's a lot more than just these three things, or four if you consider quality not part of scope. They talk about more than just managing project constraints. You need to meet the customer's satisfactions. So again, I did exactly what you told me to do. I did it under budget and on time. Why are you unhappy? Well, because the product sucks. So you got to meet their needs too. Even though you may have a contractual obligation that says you're supposed to do exactly this scope with exactly this amount of money and exactly this amount of time, you have to go over and beyond what the contractual requirements are and try to meet the needs of the customer. And we're going to talk about Agile an awful lot, but Agile is one of the techniques to make dang sure that you're meeting the customer's needs. Okay, so moving quite along, page 9, they talk about project management. So we had the definition of a term of what a project was. Now project management. So yet another goofy little definition. An application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to project activities to meet the project requirements. Basically, it's all the things you do in order to make sure that your project is successful. Okay, that's project manager. The next thing they talk about is stakeholders. And when I hear the word stakeholders, I immediately think about, vampires and driving the stakes in the hearts of people. But that's obviously not what they're talking about. This is anybody who's involved in or affected by the project. Typically the customer, right? Like I'm building a new payroll system. So the stakeholders would be absolutely everyone in the company who has to turn in payroll data in order to get paid. Okay, that would be an example. The project sponsor would be an excellent stakeholder. Somebody who's wants this thing, is the champion for this project and wants it to happen. The stakeholders also include your own people that are working on the project, although not quite as much. So basically it's talking about who are the customers, who's going to be using this thing when you're done, whatever it is you're building. So the example I like, and we're going to use this example a great deal in this class, is building a house. So they have an example like that talks about, okay, I'm building a house, and so the new homeowner, the husband and wife that showed up with, 3 kids and 4 dogs and 8 cats, they are the primary stakeholders. They're the ones who are going to be living in the house. So clearly they have a stake in this thing, right? Okay, cool. But not alone, because what about the bank? Do they have a stake in this thing? Yeah. Is the bank going to tell them, sure, you can have $5 million for your house? No, they're going to put a constraint on there. They're going to say, here's how much money we're willing to give you to accomplish this task. So yeah, the bank is a huge stakeholder because they basically control the scope. The project manager, this would be like the general contractor, right? You're going to go to a general contractor to build a house. He's the equivalent of the project manager in our IT scenarios. He's the person who's on there on time, directing traffic. He's the three-ring circus guy, cracking the whip, making sure everything's happening. The construction workers, those are stakeholders. If we told them, okay, I want you to climb up on that roof, but you can't use any ladders, it'd be like, what? So they have a stake in the whole thing. The support staff, the poor person who answers the phone at the construction company, the people who do payroll, all the support staff that you don't actually see at the job site, but nevertheless are equally important. Because if those people didn't exist, well, then your project's going nowhere. Suppliers. So yeah, I need lumber, I need sheetrock, I need paint, I need roofing. All those people are obviously stakeholders. And then the weirdest one is opponents. Yes, there could be someone in the neighborhood that doesn't want you to build there. Or, maybe your building is, I don't know, it's 3 stories high and it's going to block their view of the mountain or something. And so they're going to be very unhappy with you, and they're going to try to throw legal roadblocks. Those are all stakeholders. They all have a stake in whether or not this project succeeds or is a failure. Most of them are trying to make it work, but there'll be some that are trying not to make it work. I've got some great examples coming up of where the absolute worst project I've ever had in my entire life was a project that the key people did not want it to succeed. That was a horrible project, absolutely horrible. Okay, so continuing. So here's their little diagram. So here are the stakeholders, right? We just went through all the stakeholders. And then they have these, what they call these 10 knowledge areas. And the book is based upon these knowledge areas. So we're going to spend basically a chapter each and go through each one of these 10 items. This, by the way, corresponds to the 10 sections of the Project Management Institute's certification quizzes. They have 10 program areas, knowledge areas that they're going to quiz you on to be able to get your certification. So this whole book is based upon these 10 things because that's how the certification exam is going to come out. Okay, cool. All right. So there's a numbered list on page 12 that kind of goes through this, but most of this you can figure out on your own. Okay, scope management. You might think, well, that's easy. Absolutely not. In an IT world, there'll be people that come, you'll be 90% done. And people come in and say, oh, by the way, why don't you add this feature? And you'd go, oh my God, no way. We're way too far down the road to add this feature. Maybe we'll add it for next time. So keeping the scope intact rather than having it just, it's called scope creep, where it just goes on forever and ever and ever and ever and ever, and no one ever stops wanting things. So yeah, scope management is very important. Time management, that's fairly obvious. And we're going to be talking about the critical path. And let's talk about building a house one more time. So let's say one of the things you could do when it's come time to place the concrete for the foundation, you could have one concrete truck show up, and it's going to take the workers 4 hours to place the concrete. Or you could have 2 concrete trucks show up and have double the staff, and you could place the concrete in 2 hours time. Okay? But in reality, it doesn't matter how fast you place the concrete. If it took 4 hours to do or 2 hours to do, because it's going to take 4 days to cure before you can do anything. So speeding up that one little piece has no effect to the bottom line at all. So we're going to talk about critical path. So time management isn't always about faster, faster, faster. It's about faster on those things that are critical, those things that have a lasting effect. Cost management, that's fairly obvious. You have a budget and you got to make sure you don't blow your budget. Quality management, that's pretty straightforward too. I don't want people to slap things together when they're building my house. I want it to stand up in a windstorm. Okay. Human resources. Yeah, you got to hire and fire and train, right? You got to assign the right number of people. Most likely in an IT world, you're gonna temporarily borrow an employee. Now think about this. I'm trying to make a very good project, and so I want to temporarily borrow the absolute best engineer they have, or the best software person they have, the absolute best database person they have. So what do you think the other organizations are going to do? They're going to say, sure, you can have my best employee for 6 weeks. Or are they going to say, oh man, we got so many things we're doing on here, I'll let you have Bob. And you go, oh, Bob, well, okay. So yeah, there's an awful lot to the human resources piece. Communication. Oh my goodness, this is another one of those super critical things. If you're not communicating with all the stakeholders, and I mean continuously, not just at the beginning of the project and then surprise, it's not like the fixer-upper where they draw back the curtain and say, okay, here's the finished product. You're going to be involved with them non-stop. Risk management, yeah. There's a manner of risk in practically everything you do. You need to understand, particularly in IT world, you need to understand where the risks are and how to deal with it. Procurement management, obviously you're going to have to buy stuff. And then stakeholder management. And managing stakeholders is an art form. Okay, you can't really be taught how to do that necessarily. You have to just kind of do it once or twice to get the experience. So, read through that list on page 12 and it'll tell you all the things we just talked about. The next little box over there is tools and techniques on page 12. And you guys know what we're talking about. The Gantt chart. And we'll talk about what a Gantt chart is. But a Gantt chart is a fantastic tool for showing how things line up. This task has to happen before this task has to happen. For example, I can't put the framing of the house until after the concrete is cured, right? So it doesn't matter if those guys show up early. They can't do anything until this one other task is complete. So you line up all these tasks. That's what Gantt chart. Network diagram. We'll give a demo of these things in just a few minutes. And then critical path analysis. That's the part I was telling you about. Speeding up the placement of the concrete in a single day doesn't actually affect the bottom line. Now, if the concrete truck didn't show up and it was a day late, then everything shifts to the right. So that is a big deal. But speeding up that one element is not. Okay. They talk about the concepts of a super tool. A super tool is just their fancy term for a software management suite that handles all these things. We're going to be doing one. We're going to be using Microsoft Project. Now, the book was written when Microsoft Project 2013 was out. We're going to use 2016 just because it's the latest. Okay. So there's a table, 1.1 on page 13 that talks about this kinds of stuff. Here's all the project management tools and techniques. Integration management. I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but take a look at that table there, table 1.1. If you want to pause the video, that'd be great. Time management. Yeah, Gantt charts are really good at how to do time management. Cost management, not so much. So that's the list there. Project success on page 15. So how do you measure whether or not your project was successful? Well, one goofy way would just be pick one of those three things. Did it meet the scope, the time, and the cost? And if the answer is yes, it did, well then, woohoo, you were successful. No, that's probably not good enough. The other one would be, did you meet the customer's needs? Yes. Are they happy with the house? Not did you meet all the contractual obligations? Well, I gave you the house just the way you asked, and it's under budget, and it's on time, and they walk in and say, God, this place is a dump. Yeah, so you got to make sure you meet the customer's need. And then, of course, did you meet the main objective? In my world, when I did this kind of stuff for a living, when we stated an objective for a particular project, just make up something. Let's say, for example, I want to increase web traffic by 20%. These were measurable goals. They weren't things like, I want to increase sales, because I couldn't actually measure whether I was successful or not. But if you said increase sales by 20%, well, then I can measure that. I can go in and say, did you meet the goal? Were you successful? So you have to have discrete, measurable goals at the end. Well, that you check, goals at the beginning that you check at the end to make sure that they work. So which one of those three is the correct one to use? And there's no real answer to that, is there? It could be, did you meet contractual obligations? It could be, did you meet the needs? It could be, did you meet the objectives? Okay, once again, we're coming up on 15 minutes, so we'll pause this and pick it up again in just a few.